Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about different maturities in terms of the seed that you plant. So for example, corn, we can have an early maturing corn and a late maturing corn.
All right, so with any different type of plant that you may consider, maybe it's a plant for your garden or a plant for your field, there could be differences in maturities. Some get to harvest a little bit quicker than others. In corn, in the United States at least, this is represented by the maturity days, or the day length of the corn. So a farmer may plant a 105-day corn, or he may plant a 95-day corn. What does that really mean? Well, it means the 95-day corn is going to get to harvest roughly 10 days earlier than the 105-day corn, depending on what the weather does. What we see with corn is it takes about the same amount of heat units to get the corn up and out of the ground, regardless of what maturity of corn that it is. And it also takes roughly the same amount of time once the corn is actually made, so you have ears with fully developed kernels on them. It takes about the same amount of time for that to dry down. But in between there, we've got a little gap, especially between from about 3-leaf corn until tassel. That's where we really see a difference, where the early maturity corn really grows fast.
Corn is a grass crop. With soybeans, that's a broadleaf crop. And how soybeans are going to mature is completely different than corn, at least in the indeterminate varieties. What happens with soybeans is their reproduction is triggered by the day length that we have. So in other words, if the days start getting shorter after June 21st, when day length does begin to decrease, that signals the plant, hey, I got to get started here on the reproductive phases. So I don't care if you planted May 1st, June 1st, even way back to April 1st, it doesn't make that much difference. Flowering is going to occur at about the same time. It doesn't matter, if it's a group 0, if it's a group 2, it doesn't matter what the maturity is, doesn't matter the planting date. All of those beans are going to start the reproductive stage at about the same time. After that is when we start to see the difference there in terms of maturities. So the early maturing varieties are going to take fewer days to get ready for harvest than the late maturing varieties.
So the big difference for farmers, there's a few big differences for farmers with longer season, or some would call them full season hybrids, versus early season or early maturing hybrids. One would be just the forgiveness for bad weather. So with 105-day compared to 95-day corn, for example, the 105-day, if we go for a stretch throughout the summer without moisture, that longer season corn seems to hang in there for quite a while longer, waiting for that moisture, where the early season corn just runs out of time and all of a sudden has to start making cuts. Maybe the ear's not quite as big around, or the ear's not quite as long. It's not going to put as many kernels on because it doesn't think it can make that many kernels in time, where that full season corn could wait a little bit longer and handle those stresses a little better. The other thing is disease tolerance. When we see longer season corns, many times they're bred for a southern environment where there's more humidity, more moisture, and frankly more disease pressure. Where if you're raising something, say, for northwest North Dakota, well, there's not much moisture, there's not a whole lot of disease pressure, and so they aren't really worried about certain diseases that we'll see in other parts of the country, like gray leaf spot or Goss's wilt. So when the seed corn companies are breeding those hybrids, they're not worried with looking for disease tolerance for things that never occur in that area.
But here's where the problem really comes in. When it gets late, so this year, for example, there were many farmers that got delayed by moisture in certain areas of the country. They couldn't plant when they normally wanted to, so they switched to a later planting date, which means they also switched to an earlier maturing variety. And this is one of the things Darren and I debate about a little bit on the farm too, because in my experience, we've had a lot more problem with frost in the fall. The seed doesn't fully mature. That's a big deal for me. So I bump it back even more than Darren does. So for example, I might want to plant a soybean that's a group 00, even if we're planting in late June, where Darren might say, I want to plant a group 0 or maybe even an early group 1. In my experience, it's turned out a lot better to have the really early maturity. And for Darren, he prefers a bean that matures just a little bit later. So it all depends on what you get for a frost date in the fall. But anyway, today today we just wanted to talk a little bit so you knew that there were all these different maturities really in all the different crops, and the farmer has to try to pick what's right for his area so it finishes on time for harvest, so it finishes maybe before the heat or before the rain, before the frost, whatever it is, whatever condition he has in his area, and he's going to make adjustments based on the season.
Whether you plant early or you plant late, chances are you're going to be fighting weeds on the farm. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.